Hello, everybody. It's Stephen and Walter here for another episode of So Chatty, episode number 134 for February the 23rd, 2024. And today we're going to carry on in a few minutes with our series on machine embroidery. And today it's all about hooping. And Walter's going to demonstrate how he hoops when he makes the fronts of his specialized tote bags, because he probably does it a little different than I do, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. But right now, we're just going to talk about present projects that we have as soon as I can find it, because my whole menu bar disappeared for a second. Okay, so a couple of projects here. The ones that are going across the 8 blocks that are there with the stars and the windmills in them. That's my upcoming new pattern. Yes, pattern number 2. This is what it's starting to look like. I have half of the blocks made for it. This is a fairly large quilt, and there'll be borders and things like that. But I just thought you might want to get a sense of what I'm creating. Now, when I get it all done, I will show you what it looks like when it's finally quilted and everything as well. And I am going to make this pattern available free of charge, like I did with my first pattern, but it will not be available until about a week before my retreat in May, and more about that in a moment. So that's when you'll be able to get it then. Now, my other pattern is still available, and it's going to be available for, well, I have not decided if I'm not going to make it ever not available. And the link for it is in the show notes below. Now, the things that look like there's records, for those of you that remember records, on squares of fabric, this is an experiment. I'm making sort of an art quilt. I'm appliquing those circles on top of some squares that have been made with scrap pieces. I don't know. I've got some other ideas in my head for this. I have no idea where this is going. This is not going to be a pattern. This is an improv quilt, an art quilt, meaning I'm making it up as I go along, and I'll see what happens. I just want to get rid of some scraps. And I'm using some of the decorative stitches on my sewing machine as well with this. But stay tuned. I don't know when I'll ever get that done, if it'll ever get done. And, well, you'll be the first to know if it is done. So, in the meantime, Walter's been working on my new shirt for Australia. Let me switch us over here. So,
well, actually, I haven't really been working on it. I have it almost done. But anyway, it's I still need buttons in a pocket, and I will be doing that tomorrow.
Are you going to hold it up so people can see what it looks like?
It has lots of
peckers on it.
Birds on it.
Birds.
Actually, probably show you the back. The fabric's a little bit clearer on the back. So the birds, it's all kinds of birds.
Yep. I'm going to look very nice in Australia with my new shirt. And of course, we're both sporting Walter shirts today. You've seen these ones before. This was the last one you made, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
It's the retro kitty shirt, which I love. I've only worn it actually once, and that was when we went to that 60th birthday party of a friend of ours, because she had a retro 60s theme for it. So, and Walter made a retro shirt for himself as well. But you've seen this shirt and that one too before, but we thought we'd wear it today. So, announcements. Sewing with Stephanie and Stephen, as usual, this coming Wednesday. Link in the show notes, and Stephanie will be there joining us. Right now, as we speak, she's enjoying QuiltCon, and I think today she and Shannon and Ingrid, the 3 of them went together, are doing some shopping. I think today's plan was to hit all the vendors up. So I'm sure Stephanie will have on her channel when she gets back some video footage for us to see of that. Pop-up sew day this Saturday. Yes, yay! Those of you on my mailing list, you already got your personalized invitation with the Zoom link in that. I sent that out on Monday. But if you aren't on the mailing list, or for some reason you didn't get my email, then just go to the show notes below this one today, or Idiot Quilter, or my blog from Monday and Tuesday, this past Monday and Tuesday. The link is there in the show notes. Just a reminder, if you happen to be one of those people that I suggested that you saved the link from the last pop-up sew day, that link will not work. That was what I thought it was a permanent link, and it was, but Zoom has changed how those are done now. And without getting into an explanation of all that, a long one, just know that link won't work. Scratch it, get rid of it, lose it for all time. Get the new link that's in the show notes or in the email I sent to you. Men, hello, gentlemen out there. Men's Sewing Day coming up not this Sunday, but 1 week from this Sunday. So Sunday, March the 3rd. There's a link for that already in the show notes for this, and there'll be a link for it in everything I put up next week. And for those of you on the mailing list for the Men's Sew Day, I'll be sending that out on Monday as well. If you have never been to one before, there's a few of you that said you wanted to be on the mailing list, so you're getting the mailing list, but we've never seen hide nor hair of you since it started. Do you hear a little something in the back of my voice when I say that? You know, like, are you wasting my time? Okay. And you know who you are. You're still welcome, but I'm watching. Yeah. But if you're new around here and you didn't know anything about this before, then as I said, the link's in the show notes. It's men only, please. It is a men's only sew day on next Sunday, starting at 8 a.m. Eastern time and running until 3 p.m. Eastern time. But it's come and go. You don't have to be there right at the beginning, and you don't have to stay all day. If you can only spare an hour that day, that's fine. Come in, do a little sewing, say hi, whatever. Okay, and I think that's all the announcements I have for today. So what are we going to do today? All right, Walter brought it to my attention after last week's session, as Walter has a tendency to do always after the fact, to make me feel completely inadequate and stupid, or like an idiot. I didn't really talk about hooping last week. I showed you a project. We talked about threads. I guess in my mind, I figured if you've got an embroidery machine, you know, you have to have hoops, and so you probably already knew it. But then got thinking about this and talking it over with Walter, and yeah, there are some nuances to hooping that you may or may not be aware of. So today's session is all about hooping, and we're going to talk about, you know, when is it appropriate to float stabilizer? When is it more appropriate to put stabilizer and fabric in the same hooping? When is it appropriate to float fabric? That kind of thing. And if you're not sure what I mean by the terms float, you will be after this session. And then Walter's going to take over and show you how he hoops his fabric and stabilizers when he's doing his very elaborate tote bags. And there's some tips in there that you'll want to stay tuned for. But right off the bat, before we go over to a different camera, because we are going to switch cameras today, different location, we want to talk a little bit about maybe a few little warnings when we first get started with all of this. Here is something that a lot of people do. They over tighten their hoop when they're hooping their fabric or their stabilizer or both. The little screw on the end of the hoop. You only need to make it thumb tight. As soon as you feel it getting tight, stop. If you over tighten it, because these hoops are made out of plastic, and it's fairly high impact plastic, you risk the danger of breaking your hoop or damaging it. Or
it also could cause it to pop more easily.
I was just going to say that. Yes, because if you get it as tight as a drum skin, well, if you get a bird's nest underneath, and when the needle comes up and pulls that bird's nest, it's going to pop your hoop, and then you're going to have to start over.
What we mean by pop the hoop, the project comes apart from the hoop, and then you lose wherever the position is in your embroidery. So you can't just rehoop it again and start.
You can try, but you know, in most cases, it doesn't work out very well.
Line up. So.
You know, if you got a lot of patience, you might be able to do it. But it's in some ways, it's just cut your losses and start again. And of course, you know something like that's going to happen after you've done a 100 million stitch project that took you 2 days to do, and it was those last 100 stitches, and that's when you get the bird's nest and your hoop pop. So you don't want to do that. And do remember, when we're saying hoop pop, think about the anatomy of a hoop. Do we have a hoop handy here? I have one right here. Should have had this more prepared for that, but just thought of this. Okay, your hoop's 2 pieces, right? And those of you that do hand embroidery, you know how your hoops work, right? You have a ring and you have an inner ring. And well, it's the same with machine hoops. And then these 2 rings, don't be making faces at me. Oopsie. Okay. It's better on a flat surface, all right, but the hoops fit in together like that. And then you okay. Then you tighten it with the screw right here until you hit, you'll get to the point where, okay, that's tight. All right. But you notice this is a dangerous thing here. And you'll find this on all hoops. Can I get it in the shot? Yeah, this. See, there's a little slot on the end of that screw. And so guess what? What do you think that's there for? So you can take a flathead screwdriver and tighten it up. Don't. Because that would be over tightening, and then what we've already said could happen. Pop it, break it, whatever. So yeah, these are not cheap. Yeah, what do you say?
And no, and that this is one method of clamping down the hoop. But there are other hoops or other types of hoops that clamp using a different method, but they all usually have something that will close the hoop to a certain degree.
Now, the bigger hoops, at least with Janome, come with, I'll get one of those to show you too, come with a kind of a clipping system. And grab one. So you see this monster hoop here. All right. You will notice that it does have the screws, but they're embedded in it, and it has these little hinged pieces that come out like that. Once you hoop your stuff in here, put the 2 hoops together, then you clamp that down. But you will have to adjust it. There's a wheel on top of here. It's just like the screw that's on the other one, except you get that so it's just tight enough on your fabric, and then you clip that in, and you'll feel it. There should be a little bit of resistance when you do that.
And some of these bigger hoops also have things on the side here where you can put extra clamps all the way through.
They're called magnets.
Magnet clamps.
They have magnet clamps. And so on these big hoops, you see those little steel pieces? There's a magnet clamp. It just clamps over there. So it's extra protection. Now, when you use those, these hoops are designed by Janome for really large projects. And Janome would like to tell you that this big hoop here is meant so you can hoop a quilt. And you can embroider, you can quilt a hoop using your embroidery machine. I'm going to get comments, and I have been watching videos, and I saw a video on Facebook. I'll tell you about this right now, in a Facebook group for the 550E, where a woman had 2 little short videos showing her quilting her quilt. She did not say how big the quilt was. She did not mention if she had problems lining up her end-to-end design. I know she probably did. And I'm also pretty confident that that was not a queen size quilt she had in there, but you couldn't tell. And this is one thing, I'll tell you right now, this is a bit of a rant. I've done a lot of searches on YouTube looking for people who have been successful in hooping a queen size quilt in a big hoop on their embroidery machine and doing the whole thing without any problems. I haven't found one yet. Most of them are doing baby quilts as the largest that they have done. And yes, you could do a baby quilt. Now, some of you are going to say, yeah, oh, but there's this company in the States, it's called Dime, Designs in Machine Embroidery, and they have these magnetic hoops, and they're wonderful, and they do it all the time. Yeah, we have the magnetic hoop. It sucks. Okay?
I hear people say, oh, yeah, they use the magnetic hoop all the time, and do it. But I can tell you right now, their hoops are slipping when they are doing their embroidery.
Yeah.
And they don't obviously care that their embroidery is matching up, or their designs are matching up. Now, mind you, for a quilt, maybe it isn't such a big deal that the pattern doesn't completely match up. But
well, yeah, it is a big deal. If you're a quilter,
yeah,
it's a very big deal.
I don't know. I don't quilt very much, so I don't know.
No, you don't. And yes, it is, because when you see the whole, if it's off by a little bit,
maybe they're not picky.
Well,
But I tried doing regular embroidery
Anybody worth their snots picky about that.
in the magnetic hoop, and the embroidery slips inside the hoop, and because the magnets aren't strong enough to hold it.
Now, I do know one lady who has been very successful doing it, and she's done a full-size quilt, and that is Shirley from Around to It. But to my knowledge, Shirley has never, and I've asked her to do this many times, I have never seen her post a video showing her doing a whole quilt from beginning to end on it. But I think Shirley would agree with me. It is something that takes a lot of effort, a lot of patience, a lot of trial and error. And Shirley is the kind of person who has that kind of patience and whatnot. And for her, she does not own a long arm, and she doesn't like doing it on her domestic machine unless it's walking foot or something like that. So she has a system that works for her. But as far as I was concerned, I tried it. I tried it a lot, and I did do an entire queen size quilt once when I had the 15,000 machine. It was hell. It was absolutely sheer hell. I had it suspended from the ceiling with bungee cords, all kinds of elaborate stuff. And I probably have a video way back in my back catalog of the Idiot Quilter where I show you me doing that. But
well, I believe Shirley said in one of her when you were talking to her once that yeah, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of frustration to do it.
Yeah. So don't be sucked in when your Janome, or when you buy a Janome machine and they try to sell you the M17 for $23,000. Well, I think it's gone down a lot now in price. But anyways, big elaborate machine, and the first thing they're going to tell you, and you can quilt your quilt on this. You don't need a long arm. Be very, very aware. If what I'm telling you does not deter you from it, if you get one and you want to do it and you're successful with it, bully for you. Great. I am happy for you. Okay. And by the way, those magnetic hoops, you want to see one? Since we're talking hoops, here it is. Here is the magnetic hoop. Now, Dime will tell you when they're telling you that these are super powerful magnets.
They even say, warning, super powerful magnet on here.
And see this piece of plastic that's here? It's got a handle, okay? On the back is the metal frame that goes into your
embroidery machine.
And on the top here, this is the other part of the hoop. It's all magnetic, it's all metal, and it's stuck there right now. Now they say you got to watch your fingers. Be very, very careful. If you get your fingers between these two layers, that's why there's this protective layer, you will lose a finger. It will be horribly painful. So, are you ready for me to take this off? Because these are very, very powerful hoops. Oh my God. Oh my finger. And they always say, be very careful when you're trying to take them apart because it'll be hard to get your fingers in there. You have to really pry them. Oh my God. Oh, they're so right. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Not only that, the plastic that holds onto the machine is not very cheap. It's a cheap looking piece of plastic that I think could break off fairly easily.
And these are not cheap to buy. That was what, $300?
That was $300 Canadian for this hoop, and I had to wait a long time for it because they didn't have them in stock. And I should have known better when I ordered it because they said you could not return this. This is not a returnable item.
Now, I heard of somebody not very recently found one on Amazon that was not by Dime, and they bought that, and they say for what they're doing, it's working okay with it. This works. This works. It does work. I have actually used it. Very rarely do I ever use it, but it isn't what they say it is. It isn't that strong.
That size is supposed to replace the R28B hoop.
Yeah, okay, after saying it's not that strong, I can get it. There we go. Yeah. Yeah. Personally, now that we've had one, we've used it.
I used it once for an embroidery project, and the embroidery project slipped inside the hoop, so it wasn't very accurate looking. So that sort of ticked me off when I was doing that, because it just basically wasn't holding the fabric sturdy enough. So
I don't think it's worth the money. The hoops that I have came with my Janome. I'm happy with. They do everything I want them to do. I dare say trying to put a quilt in this unless you've got a quilt that doesn't have any batting in it, it's going to slide. It's just got to, because look, this is not that.
I mean, I had an embroidery project that was 1 layer of cotton and I think 2 layers of stabilizer, and it slipped inside there. So if you're going to put a quilt sandwich in there and that's thicker, it's not going to hold.
Now, there's going to be somebody who's going to write me a message and go, I buy Dimes products all the time. I absolutely love them. They're just wonderful and they're brilliant. Good for you. And like I said, if it's working for you and you're not having any problems, you go for it. We're telling you from our experience. Okay, that's all we're going by. And I don't think we're using it wrong, because, I mean, how difficult can it be? Okay, and I've watched the videos as well. So anyways, thought you'd like to know that, because that's something to take into consideration. So another thing you want to be aware of when you're hooping on your machine is that when we come to floating, we'll talk about this again, but we have talked about the fact that if you're having trouble with your thread, it's breaking a lot or shredding, or you're getting a lot of bird's nests, or your fabric is pulling, it means you probably need another layer or 2 of stabilizer. Well, you can float it by sliding a piece underneath, and I showed you that last week, sliding it under the hoop. You don't have to take the hoop right off the machine. You can, but there's enough play in the hoop that you can lift it up 1/4 of an inch and you can slide the new stuff underneath it. But don't yank on it, because if you start like trying to pull it way up like that, well, it's going to snap or something's going to go.
Yeah, you got to be careful how high you pull up the hoops. So
I mean, I know that may sound obvious, but I have heard of people who have broken their hoop because that's exactly what they did. So those are some of the initial warnings. We'll probably have a few other tips here along the line, but what do we want to do next is we're going to switch cameras and going to go over to the cutting table and put some hoops out there, and we're going to talk about basic hooping of stabilizer fabric, and that's where we're going to talk about the floating and what to do with that. And then Walter's going to talk about how he hoops a tote bag project. So we're just going to go over there in just a second. Okay, everybody, we're over at the the cutting mat area. It's a bigger area to work on, and I moved cameras around today, so I hope this all works okay. So bear with us. All right, so we were talking about tips and tricks with using the hoops. Another thing that comes with Janome hoops, and Walter can show this,
is this is an R28B hoop, which is actually an optional hoop with the Janome 550B. But it is 200, it's 7.9 by 11 inches. So, but it comes with these grids in the center.
Actually, put it back down the table, switch the camera, put it down so they can see the grid.
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe put it on top of your fabric. It might be easier to see.
I'll put it on top of the stabilizer to be easier to see.
Yeah, there.
Okay. It comes with these grids that will flip inside the hoop. That supposedly will give you an idea of where to put your fabric. However, I've never quite figured out how to use these.
No. When I first got the embroidery machine, I was using them to try and line up things. But they basically mimic the grid that you will see on your screen of the machine itself. And really, I don't get what you're supposed to use them for. They are very cumbersome. They do not stay where they're supposed to stay. They pop out all over the place. And the other thing about them is you have it. I had a tendency, I have a few with holes in them because I put the needle right through them. I don't know. There are videos out there about how to use these. I think they're more bother than they're worth. But if your system came with it, and maybe if there might be an application where you're doing something where you need that kind of precision to line it up, this may or may not help. I don't know. But we thought we'd mention it. And also we were talking about the magnets. And this is a hoop that has magnetic areas as well. It has these steel bars. And let's get this out of here for now. And so once you have everything loaded into the hoop, you can use these, and they just clamp onto the edges. Now, right now, they seem very loose because there's nothing in here. We haven't put anything in the hoop. But if there's something in the hoop, it would help to clamp them and hold them steady.
These are only on the larger hoops.
Yeah.
Like this is a larger hoop, and then it's on the R36B hoop as well, which is the 7.9 by 14-inch hoop.
Yeah.
So
you see, the theory here is the larger your hoop, the more unstable it is because there's more area that's being held down, and so it could be easier to pop your hoop. So these are a little bit more of an extra insurance against that. I do use them, but not often. I have used them when I have been doing sections of fabric that I've made for a tote bag where I have pre-quilted it. So I have a backing fabric, I have a top fabric, and I have batting in between the layers. So that's fairly thick. And you could float it, but it may shift there. So just to make sure I get it exactly lined up the way I want it, I will put it in the hoop, and I will use these clamps to hold everything down.
Well, I've always put the clamps on this hoop when I use it.
Oh, do you?
But when I have everything in the sandwich. But I don't float stuff very often. So I would think that when you're floating, the clamps would get in the way. And,
sure. Yeah,
and, they would. I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I forgot about that. You wouldn't, because if you're floating it, the clamps would be in the way. Anyway, it's just something else to confuse you. But your hoops will come with these.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So how do we go about hooping this? Well, we have got a hoop here, and we have 2 layers of no-show mesh Is that no-show mesh?
That's no-show
mesh. And we've got some fabric here. Okay. So why don't you, Walter, just go ahead. Not showing them about the tote bag part, just basic hooping.
Okay. So with me, when I have a piece of fabric to hoop, a lot of times I want to make sure that my fabric is in the center, or where the design will land would be in the center, right? So in this case, I have a bag piece, and I have accounted for the bottom of the bag, right? So I've put 3 inches down at the bottom that I've folded over, and then what I do is I take the remaining fabric and fold it into 4 and iron it so that I have a crease that forms an X.
Can I stop you for just a second? This is what I didn't want you to do right now, but you went ahead and did it anyway. So again, what Walter is talking about is how he lines up his fabric. All I wanted him to do is show you how to do basically hoop a piece of fabric.
Okay, well, all right, I will show you. I would take my 2 sheets of fabric, right? 2 sheets of stabilizer.
Let's get this out of our way.
And I would make sure I have a piece that's big enough to cover the entire hoop, which actually I have lots of extra space with this. So I take the 2 pieces of stabilizer, and then I'll take the fabric, right? And I'll put fabric in my hoop, right? And then I would put the hoop on top of this and hoop it down, right?
So hoop it down.
Hoop it down. The only thing is then I would want to line up the centers. See, so what I've done is I put Should I do this?
No.
Okay.
You insist upon jumping to the end. Yeah, no.
I don't do this at the end. I do
We're
this
not.
before.
Okay, just because you'll probably all be very confused right now, all I am asking Walter to do is show you how you take your basic components and get them hooped. He's got 2 layers of stabilizer.
Yeah.
He's got his fabric. We're not worrying about trying to get anything centered at this point or whatever. This is just basic
so then
hooping.
I just find where the part of the hoop is, and I will clamp down if I can get it down.
Okay. Can I take over? Because I am going to take over because you're annoying me. Okay. As I just said, for the 50,000th time, 2 layers of stabilizer, a piece of fabric, the hoop. Now, what Walter was trying to do very difficultly was to put this part into the hoop to clamp it all down. Don't try going in on top like this. Go in at an angle, push it in towards the top of your bottom hoop, and push it down at one of the corners. Now, you're going to hit this. These 3 corners are now in where they're supposed to be, but this last one isn't going in very easily. Do not force it. What you do is slide it, and it should be done on a flat table like we're doing right now for the best results. Don't try to hoop this on your lap. Slide it over the edge of the table, and down here in this corner is where I've got my little clamp. It's too tight. That's why this won't go in. So just loosen it off. There, see? Went in. Now, this is not secure yet. Make sure you pull your fabric. If there's any wrinkles in it, you should iron your fabric. Possibly even someone asked, should you starch it? You can if you want. It doesn't matter. I don't tend to starch it. I just press it so I have all the wrinkles out of it. Get it in here as I've done right now. Give it a little pull on the sides. You don't want to distort your fabric, just enough to get, it nice and smooth. Tighten up your screw. Thumb tight. You'll feel it when it gets to the point where really, if you're trying to really wrench it, don't. And there it is. It's in your hoop. It is not drum tight. You might be able to still, if you need to adjust it, you can probably still adjust it a little bit. And then just finish off tightening it up. And there you go. That's how you do basic hooping. Now, in this case, we have hoop, the fabric, and stabilizer. But what if I want it to float something? Okay, let's take this out. Loosen it off. So I have options at this point, and it's really what you're most comfortable with. 9 times out of 10, I hoop my stabilizer and not my fabric. So I just do the same thing again that I did before. Then I would stick this into my machine, or before I stick it in the machine, whichever, I've done it both ways, whatever you're comfortable with. I'll put my fabric on top, smooth it out, put it in the machine, away it goes, okay? You're going to say, well, will your fabric move? It might. This is where the file that you're using comes into play. If the file you're using has an outline stitch, oftentimes, especially when you're doing in the hoop applique, you will have something called a placement stitch. And what it does is, before you even put your fabric in, it will stitch a line inside the hoop on the stabilizer, and so you know that is what you have to cover with your fabric, or in some cases with your batting, because sometimes there's batting involved with it. Then you put your fabric down over top of that, and there'll be another stitch called a placement stitch, or a tack down, not placement stitch, a tack down stitch. And it'll be probably the same stitch as had just been stitched out onto the stabilizer, and it'll go all the way around the perimeter of the fabric for the sewing area. So now your fabric will not move. There is a feature on your machine called a basting stitch that does the same thing. And you just push a couple of buttons in that. I'm not going to show that to you today. Maybe we'll come to that when we come more into some of the editing features of the machine in one of our next videos. And that will do a light basting stitch all the way around, and that will secure your fabric and it won't move, and so everything is there. However, you can also turn around and forget about your stabilizer for a moment and just hoop your fabric. Now, when would you want to just hoop the fabric? Well, if your fabric is a slippery fabric, like a jersey or a silk or something like that, you might want to hoop the fabric itself. Again, that is more or less whatever you're most comfortable with. So you get it in the hoop, you tighten up the hoop, you fold it a little bit just to make sure everything's nice and taut. And now you throw this in your machine. But let's say this is the edge of your machine, okay, and this is attached to the machine. Now you can just take your 2 layers or whatever layers of stabilizer you're using, and you just lift up the edge slightly, and you'll slide. This is awkward because usually it'll be hooked to a machine, but you just slide it under. Pretend it's hooked up to my machine. Here, let's get on the table. You just slide it under. Make sure there's no wrinkles in it or anything like that. I'm not doing a good job of this, but you get the point. So you just make sure you didn't get anything doubled over or whatever, and that's basically called floating your stabilizer. Okay? Now, when is this also a technique you could use? If you started your embroidery and you were having problems with your stitches, they were pulling the fabric, you know that's a sign that you need more stabilizer. You don't need to take it off the machine. You just lift it up a little bit, slide another couple of layers of stabilizer underneath, and away you go. Okay, cut your thread first with the little button for cutting thread, because otherwise there's a thread coming up from the bobbin, and you won't be able to slide anything underneath it because it acts as a barrier. So you just cut the thread, slide it, carry on where you left off. You don't have to go back to the beginning of what you were stitching, because you've only done maybe 10, 20 stitches. Or maybe you could have done a whole little section and noticed it was pulling a little bit. You can float it later for that. So that's all there is. That's what floating is. So it's either hoop your stabilizer, float your fabric on top, or hoop your fabric, float your stabilizer underneath. Your choice. And it's going to depend on your project. My suggestion is, if you have a project that has it's very intense embroidery, I like a lot of stitches, like 110,000 or something like that. If you can, I would hoop stabilizer and fabric for security. Okay. If it's less than that, then it's whatever grabs you, whatever you want to do. Now, there's also some techniques that are involved with in the hoop applique, and we're not doing in the hoop applique today, but when we do, we'll talk about that more then. But that's basically how you hoop a project. Anything you want to add to that?
No, that looks good.
Okay. So, next thing on our list is, I just want to talk a bit about batting and Balizer. Okay, you heard me mention it. There are some files or some projects that will ask you to use some batting in them. For example, table runners that you do in the hoop, they usually have a layer of batting in each block. It's kind of like a quilt as you go kind of thing, because those kind of projects will also quilt the actual square too. So you're going to want some batting in there. And again, what it will do is you will put your stabilizer into the hoop, or float it. It doesn't matter either way. But if it's in the hoop, let me back up on that one. For a table runner or anything that uses blocks, that's going to do blocks, you will want to put your stabilizer in the hoop, because you need a surface where the placement line is going to be stitched out. Okay, and if you just float it, your stabilizer underneath it, it would shift. Okay, and then you're not going to hoop your fabric, because after that placement line is done, you're going to take a piece of batting and put it over the top of that so it covers the placement line. It's going to do a placement stitch on top of that. You're going to take your hoop out of the machine, but you're not going to take it apart, and you're going to use your duckbill scissors to trim the excess batting away from the stitch line, and then you're going to put it back in the machine, and you're going to lay your fabric down on top of it, and it's going to do a tack down stitch, and you may have to trim that, you may not have to trim it, and it goes on from there. Instructions will come with the file. You can download them with whatever file you buy, and it will tell you step by step what you're supposed to do with that. And again, we will show this in more detail when we talk about in the hoop applique. But there's another kind of batting called Balizer. Balizer is a product made by the Hoop Sisters. It looks like batting, but it has a very low loft. It is, well, I'll show you a piece of it. This is Balizer. Now, with the way the camera is sitting right here and that, to you it's going to look like it's batting. It feels like batting, but it is, see how thin it is in comparison?
Really thin.
It's very, very thin. It's dense, but it doesn't have any loft to it at all. So this is excellent for when you're making placemats, pot holders. Well, not pot holders so much. Not pot holders as in to pull out of a hot oven, because this stuff isn't heat resistant, okay? It's not going to protect you from the heat that goes through something like that. But, when you're using it to put a dish on or something like that, okay? What do you call that?
Trivet.
Like a trivet, yeah. Again, though, it wouldn't be great if you put something really hot on this to protect your thing. There's stuff you can buy called Insulbright that does do that.
No, but if you want to make a little wall hanging or something like that. Or...
If you want a little wall hanging, if you want a table runner, something that you want to lay relatively flat but have a little bit of oomph to it, for lack of a better word. Also, with table runners, if they're too fluffy, then you're putting something on the table runner, it's going to fall over. And that's why this stuff was invented, so that you get the thickness, the feel of that, but it's stable. So it's called Balizer. Okay, Battilizer. And Monfil sells it. I buy it by huge rolls because I use it a lot in my projects. But you can probably find it in other places too. And as far as I know, the only place that makes Balizer, the only company, is Hoop Sisters. Yeah. It's their brand.
I've noticed it for sale at all kinds of places.
Yeah, so. And your quilt store may have some in it as well. So batting and Balizer, those are two things that you may come across in projects. And I said, when we get to in the hoop applique, I'll talk more about those and show you all the things I just talked to you about and confused you with. Okay, so demo time with Walter and tote bag. And we've talked a little bit about that grid thing, which is useless. There's also markings on your hoops, usually. Hard to see in this camera, but there's a little raised piece of plastic in the center of each side and in the center of the top and the center of the bottom. That helps you center your fabric, which Walter is going to show you right now. So, Walter,
isn't that much different than what you were showing?
Well, yeah, but you do his technique.
Well, I don't do something too bad, but
just do it.
Okay, so what happens is when I do my bag, I have to I use a piece of fabric that's going to be my bag front, and I account for the bottom part of the bag. So my design has to go in the center of the part that isn't the bottom, right? So what I do is I fold the fabric in that section, and I end up having a cross hair in by ironing it. You can see it. It looks like there's a crease in the center here and a crease in the middle on the other side here. And what I'll do is when I hoop my fabric, I put my two pieces stabilizer down, right?
Like the coat.
And two pieces of stabilizer down, I put it in the hoop, and then I'll put my fabric on top of it. And I try and center my fabric so that it goes in the crosshairs that Steve just told you about on the hoop, so that I center the fabric so it's nice and level with these crosshairs. They take a few seconds to get it.
So basically what you're saying is you folded the fabric lengthwise and widthwise so you get a center point, and you've got a very faint fold line that runs up the center and up the top to the bottom and center between the two sides.
Yes.
And so those are the lines you are lining up with those marks that are on the
right. So I just center it that way. So I've got a nice center here. It could be off by a little bit, but as long as it looks straight, you should be okay. And if I get it in the hoop.
And as he's fighting to put it in the hoop, another thing you could do is you could take a chalk marker and mark your crosshair lines.
Yeah, you could do that as well. And so anyway, I've got it in the hoop. It's relatively centered. I pull it tight. And I clamp it down. So it's now what I call centered in the hoop. So it's so it'll make the design, and I've got a finished product here, so that and you have to orient it so that the top of your design shows up. This is the bottom of the design. This is the top of the design. So the bottom would be here, and you got to make sure it's oriented properly in your machine so that it stitches out.
So, in other words, Walter is doing his design in landscape mode. This is landscape mode, the long part. So his design.
So this is the bottom of my bag here, this one, and this is the top of my bag. And this is where the center of the design is going to go.
So just before he shows you his sample here, so you're going to say, but what if when I pull up my file, it shows it in portrait mode? So when you pulled up your file's top and bottom would be this way, okay? But you want it to go the other way. Can you rotate the design? Yes, you can. And you probably will have to, depending on, how big of a tote bag you're making. And that is something we will come to.
Or your design's upside down, or you hooped your fabric upside down.
Yeah.
And what you can do is in your machine, you can turn it around so that it's hooped the right way.
Yeah. So we'll come to the actual explanation of how to do that in a future video.
Yeah, so I have a finished version of the pattern that I picked. And this is what my pattern looks like after it's done. So you'll notice there's more space at the bottom for where my bag bottom will occur. And then my design ends up in the center of the bag. And that's basically how I do a bag.
Yeah, so that's how he gets it all centered on there. So to review what he did, you took your fabric.
I took my fabric.
You accounted for the bottom.
Right.
And you have a crease on here for that.
Yes, I do.
So you know where the bottom is of the bag. And so now you know what area you have that you need to center your image on. You folded the fabric lengthwise, widthwise, so you have a crosshair design just in the folds in the fabric. You could do the same thing drawing a chalk line.
Right.
So you know where your center point is. You're using markings on the hoop to line up each of those lines with those markings. So you know that everything is dead center now. And that's how you place your pattern.
Yeah, and in my case, because I have this fold in the center, I'll take a small iron and iron out those folds before I actually embroider on them. Yeah.
Oh, okay. That's a good idea. If you have a little mini iron, just lightly press out the fold so that you don't have a problem like
the folds won't show up in the final design.
Yeah. So that's something you can do as well. Okay, so let me just switch camera over here for just a second. Okay, there we are in the shot. All right, so that's how you hoop. for projects. Hooping is important. You want to make sure your hooping is done so that everything is stable, so nothing's going to pop out. You want to make sure if you need to have your design in a particular spot on your fabric that you have it lined up properly in the hoop using the markings on the hoop, or folding your fabric if it needs to be centered, that kind of thing. And so that's it. So now let's review everything we've been talking about to date. So we've talked about the basic elements of the machine. We have talked about threads to use in the machine. We've talked about making sure you have your machine threaded properly. Check your manual. We've talked about the various hoops and how you use stabilizer and how you hoop your materials, getting ready to sew. So next week, what we're going to talk about is some more tips and tricks and problem solving, and maybe actually get into an in the hoop project, like an in the hoop applique. I don't think we need to show you anything more about how to do basic designs. When you're just going to do a pattern and that you might be using this, you're going to use it as a block in a quilt, or you're going to use it for napkins or something like that. And we showed you how to do a napkin before. So now the fun stuff. How do you put this all together? Basically, how do you edit a design so it's what you want? And that's, I think, what we're going to be talking about next week, is the controls on the machine itself, that what they do to allow you to flip, rotate, size, and a few other little things that are built into the machine as well for this. And that's what we'll probably focus our attention on next week. I think that would be a good thing to do next. So we're moving on here. If you have questions or comments, we did have some comments last week that I want to go over. Ellen says, great job making these videos. I know they are time consuming. Thank you. I use 60 and 80 weight embroidery thread for stitching fonts like recipes, towels, where the font is small. It makes it more readable. So basically what Ellen is saying is, and I didn't really think about that because, to be honest, I don't usually do a lot of fonts on the things that I make, but that makes sense. A thinner thread for text, because if your thread is too thick, depending on the font you pick, it may look like a blur. So that's a really great tip from Alan there. Another person, this is Deluxe 110, said, I went to a little training session on threads one day at my local quilt shop, and the only thing that stuck with me had to do with Decobob. They recommended it for bobbin use because of it being thin. Helps reduce bulk to get that scant quarter-inch seam. Skinnier threads means your bobbin can hold more yardage. Thanks for sharing. I think what this person is talking about isn't strictly speaking about embroidery. It's just about where you might want to use a thinner thread in your patchwork or whatever as well. And I do know that some people prefer to do patchwork on a sewing machine using a 60 or higher weight of thread, because especially when you're doing something where you're going to do the fold and flip method or that, and they're always talking about the scant quarter-inch, and the scant quarter-inch is still a mystery to many people, okay? I am one of them, okay? I tend to ignore that, but it will give you more precision if you use a thinner thread. So that's more of a tip for general sewing than it is for machine embroidery. Did you see a squirrel?
No.
We can go, look around. Look, oh, there's a squirrel. Look, there's a squirrel. Yeah. Gloria Butler says, guys, sorry, I guess I wasn't clear on what I said about what I put on the back of my designs to keep the designs from scratching. I didn't mean the stitches wouldn't stay, but the cover wouldn't stay unless the stabilizer was soaked out first. At least that's what I was taught when I first started doing embroidery. Sorry for the confusion. So if you remember last week, we had this message from Gloria, and Gloria said that after she stitched on like a t-shirt or something like that, she would put that cloud cover, the fusible cloud cover on the back of it after she rinsed out her stabilizer. She was using, in that case, water soluble. And she had to do that. And it sounded like because her stitches would fall out. And we said, well, no, your stitches are in the fabric. They're not going to fall out in that case. No, what she really meant was that when she takes out the stabilizer, she can then use the fusible cloud cover so it's not scratching against your skin. But if she didn't take out the stabilizer, it wouldn't fuse properly. So that's what she meant by that. Okay, and that makes sense. And then the last comment is from Lamar Latrap, something like that. Isn't thinner thread usually used for lettering and things with lots of satin stitches? Okay, we've already talked about the fact that you would use a thinner thread possibly with certain fonts that you're doing in this. But she's saying things with a lot of satin stitching. I don't have a problem with that.
I would think the regular thread would give you a nicer satin stitch.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I have now. It also depends on how it's programmed. In some cases, you will find, like I was doing one actually this afternoon that has a very fine satin stitch. But I use. Let me see. Can you grab me that green thing? Don't judge this work because this is an experiment. But I don't know if you can see it. You're probably not. But in around this pattern, there is a very small satin stitch. But I used regular size. Okay. Where is the camera? Well, anyways, it's tricky. Very tricky. I just used my regular weight thread for this, and it worked fine with it. There might be cases. I'm not saying that's an impossibility, but I don't think it's really a great concern because of the way if the file has been digitized properly, it shouldn't be a problem.
This camera?
No, that's not the camera.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's that camera down there.
Oh.
Yeah, or no, that's not. Yes, that's the camera. Okay. Yeah. You see it in those yellow lines around the triangles on there? That's a very fine satin stitching that's there, but I use the regular weight of thread. All the thread in that piece are the same weight. But in some cases, maybe, don't trip over the wire on the camera, but maybe in some cases, you might want to use a little thinner. Again, there is no hard and fast rules to machine embroidery. It's whatever works. When you're doing a new file, it's always good, like a new pattern for a quilt. Do a test piece and figure out what's going to work and give you the best look. That's what's involved. Okay, are you awake?
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay. So that's it for us this week. Anything you want to add?
No.
All right. Oh, I am going to show you this disaster. I have been playing with my digitizing program to make these mug rugs, and I didn't want to have to sew on the back of these. I made one before this, and I put the backing and the batting. This does have, no, it doesn't, but the future version of it will have it. Will have Balizer in it. But I was putting that on after that. I just did straight embroidery on the front of it, layered it, put it in my sewing machine, stitched all the way around it, left a hole, like did it so that I could turn it back. I never know what you call that. You put right sides together on it and put it in a layer so that you can then stitch it, and then you can turn it all with the right sides come out, and your stitching's on the inside and everything like that. There's probably a name for that. I don't know what it is, but that's a pain in the butt because I wanted to do it all in the hoop. So I designed it in such a way that I got a pillow flap, for a pillow. And so that's it. Did the stitching. I put this on the top. This might be a project I'll show you how to do when I perfect it. But I did that all in the artistic digitizer first to get my sew lines run. And it came out. It worked. It did work. And then I did a horrible thing. I decided to press it. And I used steam, and I forgot I had no show mesh in it. No show mesh, if you hit it with steam, shrinks. Yeah. So like when you haven't cut it away from anything. So it kind of buckled my edges of my fabric and everything. So yeah, that wasn't good. My next one I will be using tearaway in it. What
No, go ahead.
with it. Or I could use water soluble too for that matter as well, except I still can't use steam on it until after I get the water soluble out of it. But yeah. So yeah, test. That's what I'm doing. I'm testing here. I'm playing. I will get it right eventually. Okay, that's it for us today. Hope you got something out of this. I hope we didn't confuse you. Walter was very anxious to show you how he does his bag fronts.
Well, you made it sound like you wanted to do it.
Well, no, if you'd listened to me, I
no. Anyway, show me a plan when you.
Yeah, right. Anyways, tune in again when we'll cut each other's throat live on this channel. All right, next week, more stuff. See you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody. Say goodbye.
Bye.